What happens when an Academy Award-winning actor known for his calm, thoughtful demeanor walks onto one of America's most talked-about daytime shows, only for a respectful conversation to slowly turn into one of the most talked-about debates of the season? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience applauds as Mahershala Ali walks onto the stage. He smiles warmly, shakes hands with the panel, and takes his seat. Whoopi Goldberg welcomes him with her familiar smile. Whoopi says, "It's great to have you here. Congratulations on everything you've been working on." Mahershala nods. "Thank you. It's always good to be here." Joy Behar jumps in. "People know you for choosing thoughtful projects. You don't seem interested in chasing headlines." Mahershala laughs. "I've never been very good at chasing headlines. I prefer stories that stay with people after they leave the theater." The audience applauds. Sunny Hostin says, "That's something people really admire about your career." Alyssa Farah Griffin adds, "You've also managed to avoid a lot of the noise that surrounds Hollywood." Mahershala smiles politely. "I don't know if anyone completely avoids it. I just try to focus on the work and the people around me." The conversation begins with discussion about his latest film, preparing for emotionally demanding roles and balancing work with family life. Whoopi asks, "Do you ever feel pressure to comment on every issue happening in the world because people know your name?" Mahershala pauses before answering. "I think everyone has different responsibilities. Sometimes speaking helps. Sometimes listening helps more." The audience responds with light applause. Sarah Haynes smiles. "That's a thoughtful answer." Whoopi leans forward. "But don't you think public figures sometimes hide behind that? Saying they're listening when people really want them to take a stand." The audience becomes noticeably quieter. Mahershala keeps his expression calm. "I understand why people feel that way." Whoopi continues, "Because influence matters." "It does," Mahershala replies. "But influence also means recognizing when your voice isn't the only voice that deserves attention." Sunny nods slightly. "I think that's fair." Joy says, "But people also expect honesty." "They should," Mahershala answers. "Honesty doesn't always mean speaking first. Sometimes it means speaking carefully." Several audience members applaud. Whoopi smiles politely. "I hear that, but sometimes careful can look like avoiding uncomfortable conversations." Mahershala remains composed. "I don't see those as the same thing." The room grows quieter. Whoopi responds, "Explain that." "I've learned that reacting immediately isn't always the same as contributing something meaningful." A few audience members clap again. Joy glances toward Whoopi before asking, "So you're saying people rush too quickly?" "I'm saying I try not to." Whoopi folds her hands. "But there are moments when silence becomes part of the conversation." Mahershala nods. "I agree." The audience waits for him to continue. He says, "The important question is whether someone is being silent because they're afraid, or because they're taking time to understand." Whoopi replies almost immediately. "Some people watching would say those two things can look identical." Mahershala smiles respectfully. "They can, and that's the challenge." The discussion remains calm, but viewers can sense a growing disagreement beneath the polite tone. Sunny looks between them. "I think this is an interesting distinction." Alyssa joins in. "It sounds like you're talking about responsibility versus reaction." Mahershala nods. "Exactly." Whoopi says, "But television moves fast." "It does. So does public opinion." "It does. So when someone with influence waits." Whoopi continues. "People notice." Mahershala answers carefully. "I accept that. But I also accept that I won't always meet everyone's expectations." The audience reacts with another round of applause. Joy says, "That's probably true for everyone sitting at this table." Laughter breaks some of the tension. Whoopi smiles. "Fair enough." She then changes direction slightly. "You've talked before about choosing projects with purpose." "I have. So should actors think beyond entertainment?" Mahershala answers without hesitation. "I think every artist decides that for themselves." Whoopi asks, "Even if audiences want more?" "I don't believe audiences are all asking for the same thing." Sunny nods thoughtfully. "That's a good point." Whoopi looks directly at Mahershala. "But isn't there a risk that staying neutral keeps difficult conversations from happening?" Mahershala's expression becomes more serious. "I don't think listening is neutral." The audience grows silent again. Whoopi responds, "But eventually you have to say something." Mahershala replies calmly, "And I do, when I believe I have something worth adding." There is a brief pause. Whoopi gently presses once more. So you decide when the conversation is important enough? Mahershala smiles. No, I decide when I'm informed enough. The audience applauds louder than before. Joy raises her eyebrows. That's an interesting answer. Whoopi lets out a small laugh. You came ready today. Mahershala laughs too. I came ready for a conversation. Whoopi smiles, but her tone becomes slightly firmer. Good, because I think we're just getting started. The audience reacts with excited applause, sensing that the discussion is beginning to move beyond polite introductions into a deeper exchange of ideas. The panel exchanges quick glances as the conversation prepares to explore more challenging questions, with everyone aware that the respectful disagreement has only just begun. The applause continues as the audience settles back into their seats. The atmosphere remains respectful, but there's a noticeable curiosity in the room. Everyone can sense that the conversation has shifted from promoting a film to exploring broader questions about influence, responsibility, and public life. Whoopi smiles. So let's keep going. Mahershala nods. I'm happy to. Joy leans forward. You said you speak when you feel informed enough. That's a thoughtful approach, but the world doesn't always give people time. News moves every minute. Social media expects an opinion almost immediately. Mahershala answers calmly. I know, and I don't blame people for feeling urgency. But urgency and understanding don't always arrive at the same time. Several audience members clap softly. Sunny joins the discussion. I think that's where a lot of people struggle. They worry that waiting can send the wrong message. Mahershala nods. I understand that concern. But I've learned that saying something simply because everyone expects you to can be just as harmful as saying nothing. The audience listens closely. Alyssa asks, have you ever felt pressure from your own team? Publicists, studios, people saying, you should respond to this, even if you weren't ready? Mahershala smiles. There have certainly been conversations. Laughter ripples through the audience. He continues. People have different ideas about communication. Some believe speed is everything. I tend to believe clarity matters more. Whoopi watches him carefully. But speed sometimes shapes the conversation before clarity has a chance. That's true, Mahershala replies. And that's one of the challenges of the moment we're living in. Joy says, do you think celebrities are held to impossible standards? Mahershala thinks for a moment. I think people expect authenticity. That's reasonable. The difficulty is that authenticity doesn't always happen on someone else's schedule. A round of applause follows. Sunny smiles. I like that. Whoopi nods slightly. But people also look to public figures during difficult moments because they feel connected to them. They do, Mahershala agrees. And I never take that connection for granted. But I also think it's important not to confuse visibility with expertise. The audience applauds again. Alyssa says, that's an interesting distinction. Mahershala continues. If there's a scientist speaking about science, I want people listening to the scientist. If there's a community leader speaking about their community, I want people hearing them. My role isn't to replace those voices. It's to know when I can genuinely contribute. Whoopi smiles politely. But your platform gives you reach. It does. And reach carries responsibility. Mahershala nods. I agree. But responsibility isn't only about speaking. It's also about making sure what you say helps instead of adding more confusion. The audience applauds once again. Joy laughs. You answer every question like you've spent a week thinking about it. Mahershala laughs. Sometimes I probably have. The audience laughs with him. Sarah joins the discussion. Has your approach changed over the years? Mahershala nods. Very much. When I was younger, I thought confidence meant having answers. Now I think confidence also means being comfortable saying, I don't know enough yet. The audience applauds enthusiastically. Sunny smiles. That's refreshing. Whoopi folds her hands. Some viewers would probably hear that and appreciate it. But others might say influential people have a responsibility to lead even when the situation isn't completely clear. Mahershala answers without raising his voice. Leadership takes many forms. Sometimes it's speaking. Sometimes it's creating space for someone else. And sometimes it's asking better questions. A brief silence fills the studio. Joy nods slowly. I like the asking questions part. Whoopi smiles. So let me ask another one. The audience laughs. She continues. Do you think Hollywood has become too focused on public image? Mahershala smiles carefully. I think every industry cares about image. Hollywood isn't unique in that. Whoopi nods. But entertainment is especially visible. It is, and visibility creates expectations. Sunny says, do those expectations ever become exhausting? Mahershala chuckles. They can, but I also remind myself that I'm fortunate. I get to do work I love. That perspective keeps me grounded. The audience applauds warmly. Alyssa asks, have you ever changed your mind publicly about something? Mahershala smiles. Of course. I'd be worried if I never did. The audience laughs. He continues, learning should change us. If new information doesn't affect us, then we're probably not listening very well. Several audience members applaud louder. Whoopi nods. I can respect that. But changing your mind publicly isn't easy these days. No, Mahershala agrees. People often expect certainty. But growth usually looks a lot messier than certainty. Sunny smiles. That's probably true for everyone. Joy laughs. Especially people on live television. The audience laughs with her. Whoopi looks toward the crowd. I think everyone's enjoying this conversation because nobody's trying to score points. The audience applauds. Mahershala smiles. I hope conversations don't have to produce winners and losers. I'd rather they produce understanding. That line earns one of the loudest applause breaks of the interview so far. Whoopi waits for the applause to settle. That's an admirable goal. But understanding doesn't always happen. No, Mahershala says. Sometimes people leave disagreeing. And that's okay. As long as everyone leaves knowing they were heard. Sunny nods. I wish more public conversations worked that way. Whoopi glances around the table. So here's something I've been thinking about. She turns back to Mahershala. When audiences admire someone, they often hope that person reflects their own values. Mahershala listens closely. But eventually, Whoopi continues, they discover that person thinks differently. The disappointment can be intense. Mahershala nods. I understand. But admiration shouldn't require agreement. A noticeable murmur moves through the audience. Joy raises her eyebrows. That's another interesting answer. Mahershala smiles. I think disagreement can exist without disrespect. The audience applauds again. Whoopi smiles, though her expression suggests she wants to dig even deeper. I don't disagree with that. But I do think there are moments when disagreement has real consequences. Mahershala nods thoughtfully. I agree. And that's exactly why I believe those conversations deserve patience. There is another brief pause. The panel exchanges glances. The audience senses that neither side has changed its position, but both continue listening carefully instead of talking over one another. Whoopi smiles. You know, I think this conversation is becoming bigger than the movie you came here to promote. The audience laughs. Mahershala laughs as well. That happens sometimes. Whoopi chuckles. It certainly does on this show. The audience erupts in laughter and applause. As the applause fades, Whoopi looks down at her notes before looking back up with a thoughtful expression. There's another question I've been wanting to ask you. Mahershala nods. I'm listening. The audience quiets once more, sensing that the discussion is about to move into an even more personal and challenging direction. The panel leans in slightly, prepared to continue the respectful but increasingly thoughtful exchange, while viewers can feel the conversation building toward its most significant moments. The audience settles after another round of applause. A note on the studio screen reminds viewers that the following discussion is part of a fictional, imagined talk show scenario created for entertainment. Whoopi smiles. Let's imagine this from another angle. Mahershala nods. Go ahead. Whoopi says, suppose a young actor came to you and asked whether staying quiet during a major public debate was the right choice. What would you tell them? Mahershala thinks for a moment before answering. I wouldn't tell them what choice to make. I'd encourage them to ask themselves why they're making it. Joy leans in. So motivation matters more than the decision itself? I think it does, Mahershala replies. If you're speaking because you're informed and trying to help, that's different from speaking because you're afraid people will criticize your silence. The audience applauds. Sunny nods. That makes sense. Sarah asks, do you think social media has made it harder for people to have nuanced conversations? Mahershala smiles. I think it's made fast conversations easier. The challenge is making thoughtful conversations just as visible. Alyssa adds, everything seems to become one side versus the other. Mahershala agrees. And real life usually isn't that simple. Whoopi folds her hands. But television sometimes asks people to take clear positions. It does, Mahershala says. And I respect that. But I also think it's okay to admit when an issue deserves more reflection. The audience responds with warm applause. Joy smiles. You're very comfortable living in the gray areas. Mahershala laughs softly. I think most of life happens there. Laughter spreads across the studio. Whoopi chuckles. That's probably true. She pauses before continuing. Do you ever worry that people misunderstand your intentions? Mahershala answers honestly. Of course. Misunderstandings happen. The only thing I can control is whether I continue trying to communicate respectfully. Sunny smiles. That's easier said than done. It is, Mahershala agrees. But respectful conversations usually last longer than angry ones. The audience applauds again. Alyssa asks, do you think disagreement has become something people try to avoid? Mahershala shakes his head gently. I think many people avoid feeling unheard. If they believe someone is listening, disagreement becomes much easier. Whoopi nods thoughtfully. So listening creates trust. I believe it can. Joy laughs. This is turning into philosophy. The audience laughs with her. Mahershala smiles. I apologize. Joy quickly responds. Don't apologize. It's refreshing. More laughter follows. Whoopi smiles before asking another question. You've spoken about choosing meaningful projects. In this fictional conversation, let's say a director offers you a role that's guaranteed to become controversial. Would that make you more interested or less interested? Mahershala smiles. It would make me curious. But controversy alone wouldn't be enough. I'd want to know whether the story says something worthwhile. The audience applauds. Sunny asks, so the conversation surrounding the project isn't as important as the project itself? Mahershala nods. Exactly. Attention fades. Stories remain. Several audience members clap enthusiastically. Whoopi smiles. That's a line people will probably remember. Mahershala laughs. I hope they remember the movie instead. The audience laughs warmly. Sarah looks around the table. I think what's interesting is that nobody here actually disagrees about responsibility. The difference seems to be timing. Whoopi nods. That's fair. She turns back to Mahershala. You believe thoughtful responses are worth waiting for. I do. And I believe there are moments when people hope to hear from someone immediately. Mahershala nods respectfully. I understand that expectation. And I respect why it exists. I just hope there's also room for people to respond with care. A quiet moment fills the studio. The audience listens closely. Joy breaks the silence. You know, this conversation has stayed surprisingly calm. Whoopi smiles. That's because everyone is actually listening. The audience applauds. Mahershala smiles back. I think conversations work best when nobody feels like they have to win. Sunny nods. That's a good reminder. Whoopi glances toward the audience before looking back at Mahershala. I still think we'll probably disagree on some parts of this. Mahershala nods. I'm sure we will. But disagreement doesn't have to end the conversation. It can be the reason the conversation continues. The audience erupts into one of the biggest applause breaks of the segment. Whoopi smiles as the applause fades. I like that. She shuffles her notes and looks back up. After the break, I want to shift from public responsibility to something much more personal. How these ideas influence your work, your family, and the choices you make away from the spotlight. Mahershala smiles. I'm looking forward to it. The audience applauds as the cameras slowly pull back. The panel exchanges friendly smiles, making it clear that while strong differences of opinion remain, the discussion has stayed respectful. Viewers are left anticipating the final part of this conversation, where the focus will move beyond public debate and toward the lasting impact of thoughtful dialogue. The audience returns from the break to enthusiastic applause. Whoopi smiles at Mahershala. We've talked about public responsibility. Now I want to talk about the person behind the work. Mahershala nods. That's always the more interesting conversation. The audience applauds. Whoopi asks, when you leave a set and go home, how do you separate the roles you play from your own life? Mahershala smiles thoughtfully. I try to remember that the work is important, but the people waiting for me at home are more important. The audience responds with warm applause. Sunny smiles. Family has always seemed to be a grounding force for you. It is, Mahershala replies. No matter what happens professionally, home reminds me who I am. Sarah asks, has becoming a parent changed how you choose projects? Mahershala nods. Absolutely. I think more about what kind of example I want to set, not just through interviews, but through the way I treat people every day. Joy smiles. Sometimes that's more meaningful than any speech. Mahershala nods. I believe it is. Whoopi leans forward. Earlier we disagreed about timing. Mahershala smiles. I think we did. But I don't think we disagreed about caring. Whoopi laughs. That's fair. The audience applauds. She continues. I still believe there are moments when people hope to hear from influential voices immediately. Mahershala nods. And I understand why. I simply hope people also appreciate thoughtful answers when they arrive. Sunny smiles. I think that's common ground. The audience applauds again. Alyssa says, today's conversation has been a good reminder that respectful disagreement is still possible. Joy laughs. We should probably frame that quote. Laughter fills the studio. Whoopi smiles. I might. She turns back to Mahershala. If viewers remember one thing from this fictional conversation, what would you hope it is? Mahershala pauses before answering. I'd hope they remember that listening isn't the opposite of speaking. Sometimes it's what allows better conversations to happen. The audience rises into a standing ovation. Whoopi smiles warmly. That's a wonderful place to end. She reaches across the table, and Mahershala shakes her hand. Thank you for being willing to have a real conversation. Mahershala smiles. Thank you for asking real questions. The audience applauds once more as the panel exchanges smiles. As the program comes to a close, the narrator reminds viewers that meaningful discussions don't always end with complete agreement. Sometimes the most memorable conversations are the ones where people challenge one another respectfully, listen carefully, and leave with a better understanding of different perspectives. Thank you for watching the Star Talks. If you enjoyed this talk show story, let us know what you thought in the comments. How would you have answered the questions raised during this conversation? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Star Talks for more talk show stories inspired by public conversations and respectful debate.